Hello and welcome to Red Letter Newsletter. Today we discover the chilling truth on have you used your last chance with God? Is He going to throw away, and is God's grace expired for you? In order to see this, we have to go back centuries to discover a king whom God's grace completely left, and he used his last chance with God. That individual was King Pharaoh of Egypt in the book of Exodus. But it did not happen. And one moment, the terrifying part was that Pharaoh thought grace did not have an expiration date. And the scariest judgment from God is not punishment, but it's when God stops trying to reach you. So we find that Pharaoh wasn't just stubborn, he was desensitized. So the first sign that God's grace is expiring for you is that you ignore God's waiting room. God doesn't throw judgment out lightly. Pharaoh, before God left him and grace expired for him, he had 400 years. Obviously, he wasn't Pharaoh for 400 years and he didn't live that long, but Egypt as a whole had enslaved God's people for 400 years. His entire life, the gold, the silver, the wealth, his net worth shot up while his character was slowly being chipped away by enslaving and torturing God's people. Not to mention the Egyptian genocide of murdering all of the infant boys of the Israelite mothers. And so here we have a tyrant, a dictator who's been in the waiting room, and as his net worth has been growing, guess what he's done while he's waiting? He has just become wickeder and wickeder and wickeder. He was highly blessed, but he was highly wicked. And so what you need to understand today is that sometimes God gives you the good time to give you grace as a waiting room to turn to Him. When your relationship is good, when your job is good, when life is great and you're highly blessed, guess what? That makes you want to think that everything's fine and you're coasting along, but you don't want to change anything. And so you may be highly blessed in the waiting room, but just like in a waiting room, the real change happens when what? When you get back to the doctor's office. And so therefore, just because you're highly blessed, everything's taken care of, everything's wonderful, you're on the mountaintop, remember, that may be God trying to get through to you, to show you His goodness so that you will believe He is good and follow and love Him. And we know that Pharaoh was blessed. So then also we have not only God's waiting room, but the second sign that grace might about to be expired is that you have ignored God's knock. See, Pharaoh didn't experience the judgment of God all at once, but God knocked ever so lightly at first. How do we know this? We know this because the first 5 plagues that came upon Egypt, the first 5 plagues, where the Nile was turned to blood, where frogs inhabited the nation of Egypt, that there was almost more frogs than there were people. The lice, the flies, all of Egypt's cattle died. God knocked on Pharaoh's door, and guess what Pharaoh's response was? We know that in the first 5 plagues of Egypt, guess what Scripture says? That Pharaoh hardened his heart. He did not pay attention to God. He hardened his heart. And so he knocks and gets this opportunity, but then we have this shift where grace runs out, God leaves, and a change in the story happens in the Exodus chapter 9, verse 12, where it says, "And the Lord hardened the heart of Pharaoh, and he hearkened not unto them, as the Lord had spoken unto Moses." The Lord hardened Pharaoh's heart. Did God make the first move? No, He did not. Pharaoh made the first move. When God kept knocking on the door, guess what Pharaoh kept doing? Slamming the door in his face. And so you have to realize that God blesses you to point you to Him, to not get what you deserve, But then also, how are you listening to the knocking on your heart? How are you listening to the plagues of your life that God sends your way? Are you taking notes? Are you changing your life? Are you changing your ways? Or are you continually turning a blind eye to God knocking on the door of your heart? And then lastly, we see that how are you handling the waiting room? Like Pharaoh handled it awfully. How are you handling the knock on your door of your heart? But also, lastly, we find that guess what God did before every plague came? Moses warned Pharaoh. Moses warned him. So the question is not only how you're dealing with the knockings on your door, but also how are you handling God's warning? We have a Bible right here. Yes, a Bible. God has given you a Bible. He has given you the warnings of what happens when you continually say no to God's way in sin and rebelling against God. And so we absolutely can experience the grace of God expiring and God leaving us and His presence in our life. But God never makes the first move. Pharaoh made the first move. So therefore, you absolutely can have blown your last chance with God when you choose to reject God altogether, to reject Jesus Christ and say, I'm going to do things my way. And the New Testament talks about the unforgivable sin. And that's essentially what Pharaoh committed, because the unforgivable sin is not any particular sin, but it is rejecting the gift and sacrifice of Jesus on the cross. Now, obviously, Jesus wasn't alive in the Old Testament, but Pharaoh was saying no to the grace he got, and so then God turned off the faucet. Therefore, make sure you make the choice to not ignore God's gift of grace today, to the point that God says, I will leave you like you want to be.